Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can uncover the deepest betrayal. For 3 long years, a woman waited for word from the man she loved, believing he had abandoned her without any explanation. Out on the dusty Chisholm Trail, cowboy Colt Reeves finds a frightened donkey clutching a worn canvas sack in its teeth. Inside are hundreds of stolen letters, their stamps faded by years of careful hiding. One envelope bears his own handwriting, a letter that would have changed everything, a letter his fiancée never received. What Colt discovers will expose a crime that has torn families apart across the territory. How did this terrified animal end up carrying the proof that could bring down a corrupt postmaster? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun hung low over the Chisholm Trail, painting the Oklahoma grasslands in shades of amber and rust. Colt Reeves had been riding since dawn, his buckskin mare picking her way through the scattered stones and prairie grass with the easy confidence of an animal that had covered countless miles. At 44 years old, Colt carried himself with the quiet bearing of a man who had seen enough of the world to know when to speak and when to keep silent. His face was lined and weathered, the kind of face that told a story without words. Deep crow's feet, bracketed eyes, the color of winter smoke, and his jaw carried a salt and pepper beard he kept trimmed short. His hands, rough and scarred from years of hard work, rested easy on the pommel of his saddle. He wore a dusty black vest over a faded blue work shirt, canvas trousers worn thin at the knees, and boots that had been resoled more times than he could count. In his vest pocket, hidden from view, Colt carried a small brass cavalry badge. He rarely took it out anymore, but he knew its every detail by touch alone. The badge bore the crossed sabers of the cavalry and his old unit designation, polished smooth in some places from years of handling, tarnished dark in others. It was the only thing he had kept from his time in uniform, a reminder of the man he used to be before the war changed everything. Colt had served as a cavalry scout during the final years of the Indian Wars, riding ahead of the columns, reading the land, finding water, watching for signs of trouble. He had been good at it too, good enough that his commanding officer had tried to convince him to re-enlist when his term ended. But Colt had seen enough fighting, enough death, enough young men buried far from home. When the army offered him his discharge papers in the spring of '79, he took them without hesitation. What he had not anticipated was how difficult it would be to return to civilian life. The ranch he had grown up on in Texas had been sold after his father's death. His mother had moved east to live with his sister in St. Louis. His younger brother had died of fever during the war. The world Colt had left behind no longer existed, and he found himself adrift, a man without roots or direction. For 3 years he had drifted from one place to another, taking work where he could find it. He had punched cattle in Kansas, mended fences in Colorado, broke horses in New Mexico. The work was honest and the pay was fair, but none of it felt like home, none of it gave him a reason to stay. Then he met Sarah. It was in a small town called Redemption Falls, nestled in a valley where the Arkansas River carved its way through red rock and cottonwood groves. Colt had stopped there to resupply, planning to move on after a day or two. But Sarah Monroe changed everything. She was 28 years old, a widow who ran the general store her late husband had built before he died of pneumonia the previous winter. She had dark auburn hair that she wore pinned up, green eyes that seemed to see right through whatever walls a man might build around himself, and a quiet strength that reminded Colt of his own mother. She was kind without being soft, direct without being harsh, and when she smiled, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Colt stayed in Redemption Falls for 6 months. He found work at the livery stable, then took a job helping to build a new schoolhouse on the edge of town. He and Sarah began walking together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her late husband, about the dreams they had shared, about the loneliness of running a business alone. He told her about the war, about the things he had seen, about the restlessness that had driven him across half the frontier. By winter, they were engaged. Sarah gave him a silver pocket watch that had belonged to her father. Colt gave her a carved wooden box he had made himself, lined with red velvet to hold her mother's jewelry. They planned to marry in the spring, to build a life together in Redemption Falls, to finally plant roots in ground that felt like it could hold them. Then came the letter that changed everything. In March of '80, Colt received word that his mother had taken ill in St. Louis. The telegram was brief and urgent. "Come quickly. Doctors say weeks, not months. Your sister needs you." Colt showed the telegram to Sarah, and she insisted he go immediately. Family came first. They would have their whole lives together after he returned. Colt left Redemption Falls the next morning, promising to write as soon as he arrived in St. Louis. He told Sarah he would be back in a month, 2 at most. They would marry in May, just as they had planned. But when Colt reached St. Louis, he found his mother in worse condition than he had feared. The illness had ravaged her, leaving her weak and delirious. His sister Martha was exhausted from weeks of constant care, barely sleeping, trying to manage her own household while tending to their mother. Colt stayed to help, to give Martha respite, to sit with his mother during her lucid moments and hold her hand when the fever took her. She died 6 weeks later, on a rainy afternoon in April. After the funeral, Colt stayed another week to help Martha settle their mother's affairs. Then he prepared to return to Redemption Falls, to Sarah, to the life they had planned. But the night before he was set to leave, Martha's husband was injured in an accident at the rail yard where he worked. "A broken leg," the doctor said, but it would be months before he could walk properly again. Martha looked at Colt with desperate eyes, and he knew he could not leave her alone to manage everything. So he wrote to Sarah, a long letter explaining everything, telling her about his mother's death, about Martha's situation, about the guilt he felt at being away so long. He promised he would return as soon as he could, that nothing had changed between them, that he loved her and missed her and thought of her every day. He sealed the letter, addressed it carefully, and paid extra to ensure it would be delivered promptly. Then he wrote another letter 2 weeks later, and another 2 weeks after that. Each time, he told Sarah about his progress, about Martha's improving situation, about his plans to return. Each time, he waited for a response that never came. By July, Colt began to worry. Was Sarah angry with him for staying away so long? Had something happened to her? He wrote to the postmaster in Redemption Falls, asking if Sarah was well, if she had received his letters. He never got a response to that inquiry either. In August, Martha's husband was finally able to return to work. Colt prepared to leave, but before he departed, he wrote one more letter to Sarah. He told her the date he would arrive, the stage he would be taking. He told her he understood if she was upset, that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to her if she would give him the chance. He mailed the letter and climbed aboard the westbound stage, his heart full of hope and apprehension. When Colt arrived in Redemption Falls 3 weeks later, he went straight to the general store. But Sarah was not there. The store was closed, the windows dark. A neighbor told him that Sarah had sold the business 2 months earlier and moved away. No one knew where she had gone. She had left without explanation, without saying goodbye to anyone. Colt was devastated. He searched the town for answers, but found only rumors and speculation. Some said Sarah had moved back east to be with family. Others claimed she had gone to California to start fresh. A few whispered that she had been heartbroken over something, though no one seemed to know what. The postmaster, a thin man named Fletcher Grimsby, who always wore a pressed suit despite the heat, told Colt that he had no record of any letters addressed to Sarah Monroe. Colt insisted he had sent multiple letters, but Grimsby simply shrugged and suggested that perhaps the mail had been lost or misdirected. These things happened, especially on the frontier where postal routes were unreliable. Colt left Redemption Falls the same day he arrived, his heart heavy with confusion and loss. He told himself that Sarah must have believed he had abandoned her, that she had given up waiting for word from him. But the question haunted him through the following months and years. Why had none of his letters reached her? How could so much mail simply vanish? He had returned to drifting after that, unable to settle anywhere, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He took jobs that kept him moving, always heading west, away from the memories. He avoided towns where he might have to explain himself, where people might ask about his past or his plans for the future. Now, 3 years later, he was riding a lonely stretch of the Chisholm Trail in the late afternoon heat, still carrying that brass cavalry badge in his vest pocket, still wondering what might have been. The buckskin mare snorted and tossed her head, pulling Colt from his thoughts. He looked up and saw what had caught her attention. About 50 yards ahead, sitting in the middle of the trail, was a donkey. It was a small, grey creature with long ears and a matted coat. It sat on its haunches like a dog, its head lowered, its whole body trembling. As Colt rode closer, he could see that the animal was in distress. Foam flecked its muzzle, and its eyes rolled white with fear. Colt dismounted and approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The donkey did not run, but it did not relax either. Its ears flicked nervously, tracking every sound, every movement. Then Colt noticed what the animal was holding in its mouth, a canvas sack, dusty and worn, clenched tight between its teeth. The donkey's jaw was locked around the sack's opening, and no amount of coaxing seemed to convince it to let go. Colt knelt in the dust beside the frightened animal, his instincts telling him that something was very wrong here. A donkey did not sit alone in the middle of a trail, trembling with fear, clutching a sack like its life depended on it. Something had happened, something bad. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen, pouring water into his cupped palm. The donkey sniffed at it but did not drink. Colt tried offering a piece of hardtack, but the animal ignored that too. Whatever had frightened this creature, it had frightened it badly enough to override even thirst and hunger. Colt sat back on his heels, studying the situation. The donkey bore no brand, no marking of any kind. Its hooves were worn but not shod. It had the look of an animal that had been worked hard and cared for little. There were old scars on its flanks, the kind that came from rough handling or harsh ropes. After several minutes of patient coaxing, Colt managed to get his hands on the canvas sack. The donkey resisted at first, pulling back, but Colt kept his touch gentle and his voice calm. Finally, with a shudder, the animal released its grip. Colt stood, holding the sack. It was heavier than he expected, bulging with contents. The canvas was stained and faded, marked with dust and what might have been dried blood. A chill ran down his spine as he untied the drawstring and looked inside. Letters, hundreds of them, envelopes of every size and color, some crisp and new, others yellowed with age. They were jumbled together, their corners bent, their stamps smudged. Colt pulled one out and looked at the postmark. 5 years old. He pulled out another. 3 years old. Another, just 6 months old. His hands began to shake as he dug deeper into the sack, pulling out handful after handful of unopened mail. These were not random letters lost in transit. Someone had collected them, hoarded them, kept them from reaching their intended recipients. And then Colt saw his own handwriting. The envelope was near the bottom of the sack, its paper creased and worn. It was addressed to Miss Sarah Monroe, General Store, Redemption Falls, Oklahoma Territory. The return address bore Colt's name and his sister's address in Street Louis. The postmark was dated April 15th, 1880. His first letter, the one explaining why he had stayed in Street Louis, the one promising to return as soon as he could. The letter Sarah had never received. Colt's vision blurred as he stared at the envelope in his hands. All this time he had thought Sarah had abandoned him, had believed she had given up waiting, but she had never gotten his letters. She had no way of knowing he was coming back, no way of knowing he still loved her. Someone had stolen these letters, someone had kept them from reaching their destinations, and in doing so, that someone had destroyed lives, separated families, broken hearts across the entire territory. Colt looked down at the trembling donkey, Understanding now what had driven it to flee, to hold on to this sack with such desperate determination, this animal had been part of something terrible, and somehow it had escaped with the only evidence that could prove what had happened. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his old cavalry badge, turning it over in his palm. For 3 years he had carried this reminder of duty and justice without any clear purpose. Now, standing in the dust of the Chisholm Trail with a sack full of stolen letters and a terrified donkey at his feet, Colt Reeves understood exactly what he needed to do. Colt sat in the dust for a long time. The stolen letters spread around him like fallen leaves. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders, but he barely noticed the heat. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened, trying to understand the full scope of what this sack represented. He opened his own letter with trembling fingers, unfolding the paper he had written 3 years ago. His words stared back at him, earnest and hopeful. "I will return to you as soon as I am able. Nothing could keep me from coming back to you. Please wait for me, Sarah. Please know that I love you." Words that had never reached her eyes, promises she had never heard. Colt forced himself to read through more of the letters, sampling at random from different years, different postmarks. Each one told a story of connections severed, of words left unspoken. A mother writing to her son in California, a businessman confirming a land deal, a young woman accepting a marriage proposal, a father sending money to his daughter at boarding school. How many lives had been damaged by these stolen words? How many decisions had been made in ignorance? How many relationships had crumbled for want of a simple letter? The donkey shifted beside him, its breathing gradually slowing. Colt reached out and stroked its neck, feeling the animal begin to relax under his touch. Whatever this creature had witnessed, whatever had driven it to flee with this evidence, it had been brave enough to hold on when it could have simply dropped the sack and run. Colt began to systematically sort through the letters, organizing them by postmark and destination. Most were addressed to towns in Oklahoma Territory and southern Kansas. The earliest letter he found was dated March of 1877, more than 5 years ago. The most recent was from 2 weeks past. 5 years of stolen mail, 5 years of systematic theft and manipulation. As he sorted, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the letters were addressed to Redemption Falls, the town where Sarah had lived, but there were also large numbers heading to other nearby settlements, Grey Rock, Willow Creek, Cottonwood Station, all towns within a 50-mile radius, all serviced by the same postal routes. Colt's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. This was not the random work of a lone thief. This was organized, deliberate, sustained over years. Someone with access to the mail system had been intercepting correspondence on a massive scale. Then he found the letter that changed everything. The envelope was addressed in a woman's careful handwriting. Miss Sarah Monroe was written in the return address corner, but the recipient's name made Colt's heart stop. Mr. Colton Reeves. His sister's address in Street Lewis. Sarah had written to him. She had tried to reach him, just as he had tried to reach her. Colt's hands shook as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was fine stationery, the kind Sarah would have sold in her store. Her handwriting flowed across the page in graceful loops. "My dearest Colt," the letter began, "it has been 3 months since you left, and I have not heard from you. I tell myself there must be some explanation, that the mail is simply delayed, that you are too busy caring for your mother to write. But my heart is afraid. The silence is deafening." Colt read on, his vision blurring with tears. Sarah described her days running the store, the way the townspeople asked about him, the wedding plans she continued to make despite her growing worry. She wrote about her dreams, her hopes, her faith that he would return. The letter was dated June of 1880, 2 months after he had sent his first letter to her. She had still been waiting, still believing in him. The letter ended with words that cut straight to his soul. "Whatever has kept you away, whatever burden you carry, please know that I will wait for you. Come back to me, Colt. Come back and we will face whatever troubles you together. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you until my last breath. Your devoted Sarah. Colt folded the letter carefully, his hands no longer shaking. The grief that had weighed on him for 3 years was transforming into something harder, something colder, anger. Pure and righteous anger at the injustice of what had been done. Someone had deliberately kept these letters from reaching their destinations. Someone had stolen not just paper and ink, but hope and love and connection. Someone had destroyed his future with Sarah and the futures of countless others, for reasons he could not yet fathom. He thought back to his conversation with Fletcher Grimsby, the postmaster in Redemption Falls. The man's smooth dismissal of Colt's concerns, his suggestion that the letters had simply been lost or misdirected. Had Grimsby been the one responsible? Had he stood there in his pressed suit, lying to Colt's face, while the evidence of his crimes sat hidden somewhere nearby? Colt carefully replaced all the letters in the canvas sack, his movements deliberate and methodical. He secured the drawstring and stood, his mind already working through what needed to happen next. This was evidence of a federal crime. Mail theft carried serious penalties, especially when conducted on this scale. The right authorities needed to see this sack and its contents, but more than that, Colt needed to find Sarah. He needed to know if she was safe, if she had found some measure of happiness after believing he had abandoned her. He needed to tell her the truth, to show her that he had never stopped loving her, that he had never wanted to leave her behind. The donkey struggled to its feet, steadier now, watching Colt with wary eyes. Colt reached out slowly, letting the animal sniff his hand. After a moment, the donkey allowed him to stroke its nose. "You and I have some work to do," Colt said quietly. "You carried this evidence away from whoever did this. Now we need to make sure it reaches the people who can set things right." He led the donkey to a patch of grass near the trail and let it graze while he retrieved his mare. The sun was dropping toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Colt estimated he was about 15 miles from the nearest town, a place called Grey Rock that he had passed through once before. Grey Rock had a telegraph office. He could send wires from there, contact the Federal Marshal Service, alert the authorities to what he had found. But something made him hesitate. If the person responsible for this theft was indeed Fletcher Grimsby, the postmaster in Redemption Falls, then others in the postal system might be compromised as well. He needed to be careful about who he trusted, about how he proceeded. Colt tied the canvas sack securely to his saddle, then fashioned a lead rope for the donkey. The animal followed without resistance, seeming to understand that it had found an ally. As they walked, Colt found himself talking to the creature, thinking out loud. "Someone used you to haul this mail to a burn pit, I'd wager," he said. "Probably been doing it for years, but you got loose somehow, or you got smart and ran. Either way, you held onto this sack like you knew it mattered." The donkey's ears flicked toward him, and Colt smiled, despite everything. "I know what it feels like to carry something heavy," he continued, "to hold on to hope when everything says to let go. You did good, friend, real good." As darkness fell, Colt made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek. He built a fire, more for light than warmth, and prepared a simple meal of coffee and hardtack. The donkey grazed nearby, finally willing to eat and drink now that the immediate danger had passed. Colt sat by the fire, his cavalry badge in one hand and Sarah's letter in the other. For 3 years he had been adrift, a man without purpose or direction. He had told himself that some things were simply lost forever, that the past could not be reclaimed. But now he held proof that his past had been stolen, not lost, that Sarah had not abandoned him, that she had written to him, that she had loved him just as fiercely as he loved her. Someone had taken that from both of them, and Colt intended to find out who and why. He thought about the other letters in that sack, about all the other lives that had been damaged or destroyed, the mother who never heard from her son, the business deal that fell through, the marriage proposal that went unanswered, the money that never reached its destination. Each letter represented someone's trust betrayed, someone's hope crushed. Colt looked down at his cavalry badge, feeling its weight in his palm. During the war, he had sworn an oath to protect and serve. That oath had never been rescinded, never truly set aside. It had simply been waiting for a moment like this, a cause worth fighting for. He stood and looked toward the south, toward Redemption Falls and whatever answers waited there. The fire crackled behind him, casting long shadows across the grassland. Tomorrow he would ride for Grey Rock and begin asking questions. He would find out who had stolen these letters and why. He would uncover the full scope of this conspiracy, no matter how deep it went. And then, God willing, he would find Sarah and tell her the truth. The donkey brayed softly, and Colt turned back to the fire. He pulled his bedroll close and settled in for the night, the canvas sack within arm's reach. He would not let this evidence out of his sight until it was safely in the hands of someone who could use it to deliver justice. As he closed his eyes, Colt thought about Sarah's words, "I will wait for you. Come back to me. We will face whatever troubles you together." He had not been able to come back to her then, but he could fight for her now. He could uncover the truth that had been hidden, expose the lies that had kept them apart. It was not too late, not yet. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, as Colt drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt hope. Colt reached Grey Rock shortly before noon the following day. The town sat in a shallow valley where 3 trails converged, making it a natural stopping point for travelers and freight wagons. A main street ran for about 200 yards, lined with the usual collection of businesses: a general store, a saloon, a livery stable, a small hotel, and a whitewashed building that served as both post office and telegraph station. The town was quiet this time of day, most folks taking their midday meal indoors out of the sun. Colt guided his mare toward the livery, the donkey trailing behind on its lead rope. The stable owner, a barrel-chested man with graying hair and a leather apron, looked up from his work and raised an eyebrow at the odd procession. "Afternoon," Colt said, dismounting. "Need to board these 2 for a few hours while I handle some business." The stable owner nodded, his eyes lingering on the donkey. "That's a male donkey if I ever saw one. Where'd you come by it?" Colt had anticipated this question. "Found it wandering loose on the Chisholm Trail yesterday. Seemed distressed, so I brought it along. Figured someone might be looking for it." The man scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Male donkeys usually belong to the postal service. Might want to check with Virgil Blackwood over at the post office. He'd know if one went missing." Colt nodded, filing away the name. "I'll do that. Much obliged." After settling his animals and paying for their keep, Colt made his way to the hotel with the canvas sack slung over his shoulder. He secured a room on the 2nd floor, one with a window that overlooked the main street and a sturdy door with a working lock. Once inside, he hid the sack under the bed, covering it with his bedroll and saddlebags. The evidence would be safe there while he did some preliminary investigating. Before leaving the room, Colt examined the contents of the sack one more time. As he sorted through the letters, his fingers caught on something that was not paper. He pulled out a torn piece of parchment, heavier than a letter, with columns of numbers and abbreviated notes. It was a page from a ledger book, the kind used for accounting. The entries were written in a tight, meticulous hand, and they appeared to document transactions of some kind. But the notations were cryptic initials rather than names, codes rather than clear descriptions. One entry caught Colt's eye: FM to RE, Land Parcel C14, $200. Another read, Letter intercepted, marriage dissolved, property acquired. A third simply said, Foreclosure complete, family departed. Colt's blood ran cold as he studied the page. This was not just about stealing mail. This was about using that stolen mail to manipulate people's lives for financial gain. Someone was intercepting correspondence, keeping people in the dark about important communications, and then profiting when their lives fell apart as a result. The initials FM appeared multiple times throughout the ledger page. If Colt's suspicions were correct, those initials stood for Fletcher Grimsby, the postmaster in Redemption Falls. But who was Ree, and how many others were involved in this scheme? Colt folded the ledger page carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket next to his cavalry badge. This piece of evidence might be even more important than the letters themselves. It suggested intent, organization, conspiracy. He left the hotel and walked to the post office, his mind working through how to approach this. He needed information, but he could not risk alerting anyone who might be part of the conspiracy. He would have to be subtle, careful. The post office was a small building with a wooden counter separating the public area from the back room where mail was sorted and stored. A bell above the door jangled as Colt entered. A moment later, a man emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. Virgil Blackwood was younger than Colt had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with sandy hair and a frank, open face. He wore wire-rimmed spectacles and a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There was nothing immediately suspicious about him, but Colt had learned long ago not to judge by appearances. "Help you?" Blackwood asked, his tone friendly. "I hope so," Colt said. "I'm looking for information about a piece of mail that might have gone astray. A letter I sent about 3 years ago to Redemption Falls. Never got a reply, and I'm wondering if it might have been lost in transit." Blackwood's expression grew sympathetic. 3 years is a long time to track a lost letter, friend. The frontier mail system isn't always reliable. Letters get misdirected, delayed, sometimes lost entirely. It's unfortunate, but it happens. "I understand that," Colt said carefully. "But this was an important letter, and I sent several others after it. None of them received responses either. That seems like more than simple bad luck." Blackwood shrugged. "Could be. Or could be the person you were writing to moved away or decided not to respond. Sometimes people change their minds about things." The words were innocent enough, but something in Blackwood's tone made Colt's instincts prickle. Was this man simply being realistic, or was he deflecting? "The person I was writing to wouldn't have ignored my letters," Colt said firmly, "which makes me think someone interfered with the mail. Deliberately." Blackwood's friendly expression cooled slightly. "That's a serious accusation, mister. Mail tampering is a federal offense. If you have evidence of such a thing, you should report it to the Marshal Service." "Maybe I will," Colt said. "But first, I'd like to understand how the mail system works in this territory. Who oversees the routes between here and Redemption Falls? Who has access to the mail bags before they're delivered?" Blackwood crossed his arms. "The regional postmaster in Redemption Falls manages the routes." "That'd be Fletcher Grimsby. He's been in that position for about 6 years now, ever since the previous postmaster retired. Grimsby's got a good reputation, runs a tight operation. If there were problems with mail delivery in his territory, I'd have heard about it." Colt filed this information away. 6 years. That aligned roughly with when the earliest stolen letters were postmarked. "How often do you see Grimsby?" Colt asked. "Does he come through Grey Rock much?" "Once a month or so," Blackwood said. "He makes rounds to the smaller post offices, checks on operations, collects reports." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about how things work," Colt said casually. "I've spent a lot of time on the frontier, but I've never paid much attention to how mail gets from one place to another." Blackwood seemed to relax slightly, as if deciding Colt was simply a concerned citizen rather than a real threat. "It's a complicated system," he admitted. "We've got riders who carry mail bags between towns, stage lines that transport larger shipments, and a whole network of sorting stations. Lots of moving parts, lots of opportunities for things to go wrong. Or for things to go missing," Colt said quietly. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, you'd better have proof. Fletcher Grimsby is a respected member of the community. He's not the kind of man who would steal mail or interfere with government correspondence." Colt held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not suggesting anything, just trying to understand what might have happened to my letters." But he was suggesting something, and both men knew it. The question was whether Blackwood was defensive because he was protecting a fellow postmaster's reputation or because he was protecting a co-conspirator. Colt decided to try a different approach. "I found a donkey yesterday on the Chisholm Trail. The stable owner here said it looked like a male donkey. Would that be one of yours?" Blackwood frowned. "A donkey? We don't use donkeys for mail delivery in Grey Rock. We use riders on horseback, faster and more reliable." "What about Redemption Falls?" "Grimsby's got a couple of donkeys, I think. Uses them for local deliveries within town. But they wouldn't be out on the trail." Blackwood paused. "You say you found this donkey yesterday?" "That's right. Sitting in the middle of the trail, looked like it had been running hard." Blackwood's expression became thoughtful, almost troubled. "That's odd. If it was one of Grimsby's animals, what was it doing that far from Redemption Falls?" "That's what I'd like to know," Colt said. For a moment, the two men regarded each other in silence. Colt sensed that Blackwood knew something, or suspected something, but was not willing to share it with a stranger. The postmaster's loyalty to his colleague was fighting against whatever doubts he might harbor. Finally, Blackwood spoke. "Look, I can't help you with your lost letters. That's a matter for the Marshal Service, if you really think there was foul play. But I'll tell you this much, if you're planning to go stirring up trouble in Redemption Falls, you'd better be sure of your facts. Grimsby's got friends in this territory, powerful friends." It was not quite a warning, but it was close. Colt nodded slowly, understanding the message beneath the words. "I appreciate your time," he said, turning toward the door. "Mister," Blackwood called after him. Colt paused, looking back. "That donkey you found, where is it now?" "Stabled at the livery," Colt said. "Why?" "Just wondering," Blackwood said. "If it is one of Grimsby's animals, he'll want it back. He's particular about his property." Colt tipped his hat and left the post office, his mind churning. That conversation had confirmed several things. First, Fletcher Grimsby was indeed the regional postmaster, and he had been in that position for 6 years, plenty of time to establish a systematic operation of mail theft. Second, Grimsby used donkeys for deliveries, which explained where the animal Colt had found had come from. Third, and most troubling, Grimsby apparently had powerful friends who would protect him if accusations were made. Colt walked back toward the hotel, keeping his eyes open, watching the street. He had stirred the pot by asking questions. If Blackwood was involved in the conspiracy, or even just loyal enough to warn Grimsby, then Colt's presence and his questions would be reported. That meant he needed to move quickly, before anyone had time to cover their tracks or destroy evidence. The afternoon sun beat down as Colt climbed the stairs to his hotel room. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately checking to ensure the canvas sack was still hidden under the bed. It was there, untouched. But as Colt straightened, he noticed something that had not been there before, a slip of paper, folded once, lying on his pillow. He picked it up and unfolded it. The message was brief, written in an uneven hand. "You're asking dangerous questions. Leave Grey Rock before sundown if you value your life." Colt stared at the note for a long moment, then crumpled it in his fist. Someone had been watching him. Someone had entered his room while he was at the post office. Someone wanted him gone, which meant he was getting close to something important. He smiled grimly and tucked the note into his pocket alongside the ledger page and his cavalry badge. Whoever had written that warning had made a mistake. They had shown their hand too early, revealed that Colt was a threat. And Colt Reeves had never been good at backing down from threats. Colt did not leave Grey Rock before sundown. Instead, he spent the afternoon conducting his own quiet investigation, talking to people in the saloon, the general store, asking casual questions about mail delivery, about Fletcher Grimsby, about anything that might give him a clearer picture of what he was dealing with. What he learned was troubling. Grimsby was well known throughout the territory, respected by most, feared by some. He had arrived in Redemption Falls 6 years ago, with excellent credentials and references from back east. He had quickly modernized the postal system, improved delivery times, and established himself as an efficient administrator. He was also a shrewd businessman who had invested in local properties and seemed to have an uncanny ability to acquire land just before it became valuable. Several people mentioned that Grimsby had business partnerships with a man named Raymond Everett, a lawyer and land speculator who operated out of Cottonwood Station. Together, they had purchased multiple properties over the past few years, always at good prices, always from people who seemed eager or desperate to sell. The initials R. Ray. Raymond Everett. Colt was certain now that the ledger page he had found documented transactions between Grimsby and Everett, showing how they had used stolen mail to manipulate people into losing their property. As evening approached, Colt returned to his hotel room to examine the letters more carefully. He spread them across the bed, organizing them by destination and date, looking for patterns. Many of the letters addressed to Redemption Falls were from banks, lawyers, or government offices, exactly the kind of correspondence that could make or break someone's financial situation. As he sorted through a stack of letters addressed to a farmer named Jacob Winters in Redemption Falls, Colt noticed something odd. One envelope felt different from the others, slightly heavier, with something hard inside. He carefully opened it and shook out the contents. A letter fell onto the bed, along with a small brass key. Colt picked up the key, turning it over in his fingers. It was small, the kind used for a lockbox or a safe. The key was attached to a thin chain, and on the chain hung a small metal tag stamped with the number 47. He unfolded the letter and read it. The message was from a lawyer in Kansas City, written to Jacob Winters. Mr. Winters, your late uncle's estate has been settled. As discussed, I am sending the key to the safe deposit box containing his personal effects and the deed to his property in Colorado. Please present this key and proper identification at the First Bank of Kansas City to claim your inheritance. The letter was dated 2 years ago. Colt's jaw tightened. Jacob Winters had never received this letter, which meant he never knew about his inheritance. And if Grimsby had intercepted this letter, he would have known about the inheritance too. Colt rifled through more letters addressed to Winters, finding several others from the same law firm, each one more urgent than the last. Mr. Winters, we have not received a response to our previous correspondence. Please contact us regarding your uncle's estate. The final letter was marked, Final Notice. If we do not hear from you within 30 days, the estate will be settled according to state law, and the property will be sold at auction. It was a perfect scheme. Grimsby intercepts the letters about the inheritance. Winters never knows he has money coming. The property goes to auction, and who would be there to buy it at a bargain price? Someone with inside information, like Fletcher Grimsby or his partner Raymond Everett. Colt pocketed the key, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. He needed to find Jacob Winters to tell him what had happened, but first he needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Colt tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Who is it?" "Virgil Blackwood," came the reply. "From the post office. I need to talk to you." Colt approached the door cautiously, opening it just wide enough to see the hallway. Blackwood stood there alone, his hands visible and empty. He looked nervous, glancing up and down the corridor. "May I come in?" Blackwood asked. "I'd rather not be seen talking to you in public." Colt studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Blackwood entered quickly, and Colt closed the door behind him. "I'm taking a risk coming here," Blackwood said without preamble. "If certain people find out I talked to you, it could go badly for me." "What people?" Colt asked, though he already knew the answer. "Fletcher Grimsby and his associates," Blackwood said. He noticed the letters spread across the bed and his eyes widened. "Good Lord, where did you get all those?" "From the donkey I found," Colt said. "The one you said looked like a male donkey. These letters have been stolen, Blackwood, stolen and hidden for years. Some of them are mine. Letters I sent to someone I cared about, letters that never reached her." Blackwood sank into the room's only chair, his face pale. "I suspected something was wrong. I've suspected for months. But I had no proof. And Grimsby is so well connected that making accusations without evidence would have been career suicide. Tell me what you know, Colt said. Blackwood took a deep breath. About 8 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in the mail logs. Letters that should have been delivered weren't showing up in the receipt records. At first, I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping, but then I noticed a pattern. The missing letters were always ones that seemed important: legal documents, bank correspondence, personal letters with money enclosed. You brought this to Grimsby's attention? I tried, Blackwood said bitterly. He dismissed my concerns, said I was seeing problems where none existed. He reminded me that he was the regional postmaster and I was just a small-town clerk. He suggested that if I valued my position, I should focus on my own work and not worry about things above my station. Colt nodded, understanding. He threatened you. Not in so many words, but yes. And then strange things started happening. My horse went lame under suspicious circumstances. My room at the boarding house was broken into, though nothing was taken. I got the message: keep quiet or face consequences. But you're here now, Colt observed, talking to me. Blackwood met his eyes. Because those letters on your bed represent people's lives being destroyed. I've turned a blind eye for months because I was afraid, but I can't do it anymore. Not after seeing the evidence right in front of me. Do you know where Grimsby keeps his records? Colt asked. If he's been doing this systematically, there must be documentation somewhere. Ledgers, accounts, lists of intercepted mail. He has an office in Redemption Falls, in the back of the post office building, Blackwood said. I've never been inside, but I know he keeps it locked at all times. He's very particular about who has access. Colt pulled out the torn ledger page and showed it to Blackwood. I found this in the mail sack. Does this look like Grimsby's handwriting? Blackwood studied the page, his expression growing darker. Yes, that's his hand. And these transactions, he looked up at Colt. This isn't just mail theft. This is fraud, extortion, conspiracy. If this goes to trial, Grimsby and everyone involved could hang. Which is why they'll fight hard to keep it hidden, Colt said, and why they're trying to scare me off. Blackwood stood, his jaw set with new resolve. What do you need from me? Information, Colt said. Everything you know about Grimsby's operations, his associates, his schedule, and access to the telegraph. I need to contact the Federal Marshal Service, but I need to be sure the message actually gets sent and doesn't get intercepted. I can do that, Blackwood said. I'll send it myself, tonight, after the office closes. But you need to know something. Grimsby has friends in the Marshal Service too. Not everyone in law enforcement is corrupt, but some are on his payroll. You'll need to be careful about who you trust. Colt considered this. Is there anyone you'd recommend? Someone you know is clean. Marshal Thomas Brennan, out of Fort Smith, Blackwood said without hesitation. He's old school, honest to his bones. If you can get word to him, he'll take action. Then that's who we contact, Colt said. He began carefully gathering the letters, preparing to secure them again. How soon can you send that telegram? Give me 2 hours, Blackwood said. I'll compose it to look like routine business correspondence. If anyone checks the logs, they won't see anything suspicious. Good. Colt extended his hand, and Blackwood shook it. Thank you for coming forward. I know it wasn't easy. I should have done it months ago, Blackwood said quietly. Maybe if I had, some of these people wouldn't have suffered. You're doing it now, Colt said. That's what matters. After Blackwood left, Colt sat on the edge of the bed, the brass key heavy in his palm. He thought about Jacob Winters, about Sarah, about all the others whose lives had been damaged by Grimsby's greed. The stolen letters were evidence of crimes committed, but they were also evidence of something more, of human connection severed, of trust betrayed, of the fundamental assumption that the mail would be delivered fairly and honestly. Colt's father had been a cavalry officer, a man who believed deeply in honor and duty. He had taught his sons that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was difficult or dangerous. Justice was one of those things. Truth was another. Standing up, Colt hid the canvas sack and its contents under the loose floorboard he had discovered earlier. The evidence would be safe there until he was ready to present it to Marshal Brennan. Tomorrow, he would ride for Redemption Falls. He would find Sarah, tell her the truth about what had happened, and show her that he had never stopped loving her. But tonight, he would rest and prepare, because he knew that once he arrived in Redemption Falls and confronted Grimsby, there would be no turning back. The man would fight to protect his empire of lies, and that fight might turn violent. Colt checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded and clean. He sharpened his knife, tested the leather on his holster. Then he lay down on the bed, fully clothed, his weapons within easy reach. Outside his window, grey rock settled into its evening rhythms. Lamps were lit in windows up and down the street. Somewhere a dog barked. A piano played in the saloon, the notes drifting through the warm night air. Colt closed his eyes, but he did not sleep deeply. He had learned long ago, during his time in the cavalry, to rest while remaining alert to danger. It was a skill that had saved his life more than once. Tonight, it might need to save him again. Colt left Grey Rock before dawn, the canvas sack secured in his saddlebags and the donkey trailing behind his mare. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. As the sun rose, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson, Colt found himself reaching into his vest pocket, past the cavalry badge and the brass key, to touch the silver locket he kept hidden there. He had not looked at it in months, perhaps longer. But now, with Redemption Falls just a day's ride ahead, he needed to see her face again. Colt reined in his mare and dismounted, finding a flat rock to sit on while his animals rested. He opened the locket carefully, his rough fingers gentle with the delicate mechanism. Inside was a small photograph of Sarah, taken at a portrait studio in the spring before he left. She was wearing a high-collared dress with lace at the throat, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant style. But what drew the eye was her expression, warm, intelligent, with a hint of mischief in her smile. Colt traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb, remembering the day it was taken. Sarah had been nervous about sitting for the portrait, worried she would not look her best. But the photographer had been skilled, capturing not just her features, but something of her spirit, her strength. "I'm coming back," Colt said quietly to the image. "I know it's 3 years late, but I'm coming back, and I'm going to make this right." He closed the locket and returned it to his pocket, then remounted and continued south toward Redemption Falls. The landscape gradually changed as he rode, the open grasslands giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub, oak, and cedar. By mid-afternoon, he could see the Arkansas River Valley in the distance, a ribbon of green cutting through the red rock terrain. Redemption Falls sat on the north bank of the river, sheltered by bluffs on 3 sides. It was larger than Grey Rock, with perhaps 300 residents, a proper main street, and several side streets lined with homes and businesses. Colt could see the white steeple of a church rising above the other buildings, and beyond that, the red tile roof of what looked like a new hotel. The town had grown in the 3 years since he had last seen it. New construction was evident everywhere: a second general store, a barber shop, a building marked as a land office. Prosperity had come to Redemption Falls, though Colt now suspected that prosperity had been built on the backs of people who had been cheated out of their rightful correspondence and property. He entered town from the east, keeping his head down and his hat brim low. The fewer people who noticed him, the better. He needed to observe, to understand the layout of the town and identify key locations before he made any moves. The post office was easy to spot, a sturdy brick building near the center of town, with the American flag flying from a pole out front. Through the windows, Colt could see people coming and going, conducting their business. Somewhere inside that building was Fletcher Grimsby's office, and somewhere in that office was likely more evidence of the crimes that had been committed. Colt rode past without stopping, Noting the locations of the marshal's office, a small wooden structure with bars on the windows, and the building marked as R. Everett, attorney at law. He memorized the streets, the alleys, the likely escape routes if things went badly. At the edge of town, he found a small boarding house run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson. She had rooms for travelers, she explained, and meals included if he wanted them. Colt paid for 3 nights in advance and stabled his animals in the shed out back. The donkey, he told her, was a stray he had found. Mrs. Henderson accepted this without question, more interested in discussing the weather and the church socials scheduled for Sunday. Once settled in his room, Colt waited until evening before venturing back into town. He needed to find Sarah, but he had to be careful. If Grimsby learned that Colt was in Redemption Falls asking questions, the postmaster would move quickly to destroy evidence and protect himself. As darkness fell, Colt made his way to the saloon, a place where men gathered to drink and talk, where information flowed as freely as whiskey. He found a corner table with a good view of the door and ordered a beer, sipping it slowly while he listened to the conversations around him. It did not take long to hear Grimsby's name mentioned. 2 men at the bar were discussing a property auction scheduled for next week, a farm on the outskirts of town that was being sold for back taxes. The owner had apparently fallen behind on payments and was being forced to sell. "Shame about the Kendrick place," one man said. "Tom Kendrick was a good farmer, but he never recovered after his wife passed. Lost his will to keep going, I think. Didn't help that his brother never came through with that loan he promised," the other man replied. "Tom was counting on that money to keep the farm afloat." "You think the brother really backed out, or did something happen to the letter?" the first man asked, lowering his voice. "Seems like an awful lot of folks around here have had troubles with mail not arriving when it should." "Careful talking like that," his companion warned. "Grimsby's got ears everywhere, and he doesn't take kindly to people questioning how he runs things." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Colt had heard enough. The pattern was clear. People across the territory were being systematically isolated from crucial correspondence, and when they fell into financial trouble as a result, their property was bought up by Grimsby and his associates. After an hour, Colt left the saloon and walked through the quiet streets, his mind working through the problem. He needed to find Sarah, but he could not simply walk up to her door, assuming she even lived in Redemption Falls anymore. He needed information, and he needed it without arousing suspicion. The next morning, Colt returned to the general store he had passed the day before. It was not the store Sarah had owned, which had apparently been sold and converted into something else. This was a new establishment, larger and more modern. Behind the counter stood a young woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Help you?" she asked brightly. "I hope so," Colt said, adopting the manner of a man seeking old friends. "I'm looking for someone who used to live here, a woman named Sarah Monroe. We were acquainted some years back, and I was hoping to reconnect." The young woman's expression grew sad. "Oh, Miss Monroe, yes, I remember her. She ran the old general store before I came to town. But she left Redemption Falls about 3 years ago, sold her business and moved away." Colt's heart sank, though he tried not to show it. "Do you know where she went?" "I'm afraid not. She left rather suddenly, from what I understand. Some folks said she went back east, others thought she might have gone to California. She didn't tell many people her plans." The young woman paused, then added quietly, "There were rumors she had suffered some kind of heartbreak. A man she was supposed to marry, who never came back for her." The words hit Colt like a physical blow. Sarah had not just left Redemption Falls, she had fled, heartbroken, believing he had abandoned her. And all because Grimsby had stolen their letters, had kept them from knowing the truth. "Thank you," Colt managed to say. "I appreciate your help." He left the store and walked aimlessly for a while, trying to contain the anger and grief warring inside him. Sarah was gone, scattered to the wind, and he had no way of knowing where she had ended up. He could search for years and never find her. But perhaps he did not need to search. Perhaps, if he exposed Grimsby's crimes and got justice for all those who had been wronged, word would spread. Stories would be published in newspapers across the territories. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah would hear about it. She would learn that Colt had not abandoned her, that he had fought to uncover the truth and make things right. It was a slim hope, but it was all he had. Colt made his way back to the boarding house, his resolve hardening with every step. He would bring down Fletcher Grimsby and Raymond Everett. He would expose their conspiracy, free the people of this territory from their manipulation, and ensure that no one else would suffer as he and Sarah had suffered. That evening, as he sat in his room cleaning his revolver, there was a soft knock at his door. Colt tensed, his hand moving to his weapon. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Henderson, dear. I've got a telegram for you. Just came in this afternoon." Colt opened the door and accepted the envelope she offered. "Thank you, ma'am." After she left, he opened the telegram and read the brief message. It was from Marshal Brennan in Fort Smith, routed through Virgil Blackwood in Grey Rock. "Received your information. Stop. Evidence compelling. Stop will arrive. Redemption falls in 3 days. Stop. Maintain surveillance, but take no action until my arrival. Stop, Brennan." 3 days. Colt could maintain his cover for 3 days, gather more evidence, prepare for the marshal's arrival. It would not be easy, but it was manageable. He folded the telegram and tucked it into his pocket, next to Sarah's locket. The end game was beginning. Soon, Fletcher Grimsby would face justice for what he had done, and Colt Reeves would finally have a measure of peace. For 2 days, Colt watched and waited. He moved through Redemption Falls like a ghost, observing without being observed, noting the rhythms of the town and the patterns of the people who ran it. He learned that Fletcher Grimsby arrived at the post office each morning at precisely 8 o'clock, stayed until noon, then returned to his house on the north edge of town for his midday meal. In the afternoons, he often visited Raymond Everett's law office, where the two men would meet behind closed doors for hours at a time. Colt also learned that Grimsby employed 2 men as enforcers, rough characters named Pike and Dalton, who ostensibly worked as mail carriers, but spent most of their time intimidating anyone who asked too many questions or fell behind on payments they owed to Grimsby's various business ventures. These were the men who had likely left the threatening note in Colt's room back in Grey. Anyone who asked too many questions or fell behind on payments they owed to Grimsby's various business ventures. These were the men who had likely left the threatening note in Colt's room back in Grey Rock. On the second evening, Colt followed the donkey's trail backward, using his old cavalry scout skills to read the signs the animal had left during its desperate flight. The tracks led him away from town, into the hills west of Redemption Falls, to a secluded ravine hidden behind a stand of cottonwood trees. What he found there made his blood run cold. The ravine showed signs of regular use, cleared ground, trampled earth, and in the center a large fire pit ringed with stones. But it was what lay scattered around the pit that told the true story. Fragments of paper, partially burned, their edges blackened and curled. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scattered across the ground like fallen snow. Colt knelt and began gathering the fragments, piecing together what he could read. Most were too damaged to salvage, but a few bore legible words. "My dearest daughter, I am writing to inform you. The sum of $200. With deepest sympathy for your loss." This was where Grimsby had been destroying the evidence. He would intercept letters, read them to identify anything valuable or useful, extract any money or documents enclosed, and then haul the empty envelopes here to be burned. The donkey had likely made this trip dozens of times, carrying sacks of doomed correspondence to be reduced to ash. But on its last trip, something had spooked the animal. Maybe it had finally had enough of being used for such evil purposes. Maybe it had sensed danger. Whatever the reason, it had bolted with a full sack still in its possession, fleeing down the trail where Colt had found it. Colt carefully collected several of the partially burned fragments and placed them in his pocket. They were damaged, but they were still evidence. Combined with the intact letters and the ledger page, They painted a comprehensive picture of systematic mail fraud conducted over years. As he worked, Colt heard voices approaching through the trees. He quickly moved into the shadows, crouching behind a fallen log. Two men emerged into the clearing, Pike and Dalton. They were arguing about something, their voices carrying clearly in the evening air. "Grimsby's getting nervous," Pike said. He was a tall man with a scarred face and mean eyes. "That stranger asking questions in Grey Rock has him spooked. Blackwood sent word that the man was asking about mail theft, about lost letters." "We should have dealt with him when he was in Grey Rock," Dalton replied. He was shorter but broader, built like a bull, with hands that looked capable of breaking bones. But Grimsby said to just warn him off, see if he'd take the hint. Well, he didn't take the hint. Blackwood says he left town heading south. That means he's probably here in Redemption Falls by now. Dalton spat into the fire pit. "Then we find him and make sure he doesn't ask any more questions, permanent-like. Grimsby wants it to look like an accident. He doesn't need a murder investigation drawing attention." "An accident?" Dalton laughed darkly. "Sure. Stranger falls off his horse, breaks his neck. These things happen." Colt's hand moved to his revolver, but he kept still. 2 against 1 in an isolated location, the odds were not good, even for someone with his experience. Better to wait, to learn what he could, and avoid confrontation until Marshal Brennan arrived. Pike walked to the edge of the fire pit and kicked at some of the burned fragments. "We need to clean this up better. Too much evidence lying around. Who's going to find it? This ravine is miles from anywhere. Nobody comes out here. The donkey came from here. If that stranger found the donkey, maybe he can track it back to this spot." Dalton considered this. "You might be right. We'll come back tomorrow with shovels, bury all this ash deep, maybe burn the pit itself, make it look like a natural fire." The two men continued talking for a few more minutes, discussing their plans to clean up the site and search Redemption Falls for Colt. Then they mounted their horses and rode back toward town, leaving Colt alone in the gathering darkness. He waited a full hour after they left before moving from his hiding spot. His mind was racing, weighing his options. Pike and Dalton knew he was in the area, which meant his time was limited. They would be searching for him, and if they found him before Marshal Brennan arrived, they would kill him and make it look like an accident. Colt needed to go to ground, to hide somewhere safe until the marshal came. But he also needed to keep watching Grimsby to ensure the postmaster did not destroy evidence or flee before justice could be served. As he made his way back to town through the darkness, Colt formulated a plan. He would move out of the boarding house and find a less obvious place to stay. Mrs. Henderson was kind, but she was also talkative, and if Pike and Dalton started asking questions, she would innocently reveal everything she knew about her guest. There was an old stable on the outskirts of town, one that had been abandoned after its owner died the previous winter. Colt had noticed it during his reconnaissance. It would provide shelter and concealment, and it was close enough to Grimsby's house that Colt could maintain surveillance. He returned to the boarding house after midnight, moving quietly. He gathered his belongings, including the precious canvas sack hidden under his bed, and left payment for the remaining nights on the dresser, along with a note thanking Mrs. Henderson for her hospitality. The stable was dark and musty but structurally sound. Colt made a nest in the loft, where he could see the road through gaps in the walls but remain hidden from view. He settled in with his rifle across his knees, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across the ground below. Tomorrow was the third day. Tomorrow, Marshal Brennan would arrive in Redemption Falls, and tomorrow Fletcher Grimsby's empire of lies would begin to crumble. But Colt knew that Grimsby would not go quietly. Men like him never did. They fought to the last breath, using every weapon at their disposal, hurting anyone who stood in their way. The next 24 hours would be dangerous. Colt needed to stay alive, stay hidden, and keep Grimsby under observation. It seemed simple enough, but Colt's instincts told him that something was going to go wrong. These kinds of plans always had complications. He thought about Sarah, about the life they might have had if Grimsby had not stolen their letters. 3 years of separation, 3 years of pain and loneliness, all because one man had decided that his greed was more important than other people's happiness. Colt pulled out Sarah's locket and opened it, studying her photograph in the moonlight. "I'm going to make this right," he whispered. "Even if I can't find you, even if you never know what I did, I'm going to make sure nobody else suffers like we did." He closed the locket and tucked it away, then checked his weapons one more time. The revolver was loaded and clean, the rifle was ready, his knife was sharp. He was as prepared as he could be for whatever tomorrow might bring. As the night deepened, Colt allowed himself to doze, his cavalry training enabling him to rest while remaining alert for danger. The stable creaked and settled around him. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of rain. And in his dreams, Colt was back in Redemption Falls 3 years ago, walking with Sarah in the evening light, talking about their future, believing that nothing could separate them. The dream was sweet and painful in equal measure, a reminder of what had been lost and what might yet be reclaimed. When he woke before dawn, rain was falling steadily, drumming on the stable roof. Colt stood and stretched, working the stiffness from his muscles. He moved to the loft opening and looked out at Grimsby's house, visible through the rain and morning mist. Lamplight showed in one window. The postmaster was awake, beginning his day. In a few hours, he would go to his office, conduct his business, pretend to be a respectable member of the community. He had no idea that today would be the day his secrets were exposed, his crimes revealed, his careful empire dismantled. Colt smiled grimly. Justice was coming to Redemption Falls, and Fletcher Grimsby was about to learn that some debts could not be avoided, some crimes could not be hidden, and some men could not be intimidated or silenced. The rain continued to fall as Colt settled back into his hiding place to wait for Marshal Brennan's arrival. The endgame had begun. Marshal Thomas Brennan arrived in Redemption Falls at 10 o'clock in the morning, riding a grey gelding and wearing a long duster coat that shed the rain like oil. He was in his late 50s, with iron-grey hair and a weathered face that spoke of long years on the frontier. He moved with the deliberate confidence of a man who had seen every kind of trouble and knew how to handle it. Colt watched from his hiding place in the stable as Brennan dismounted in front of the marshal's office. The federal lawman went inside, presumably to meet with the local marshal and establish his authority. Within the hour, Colt knew, Brennan would be looking for him, ready to review the evidence and plan their next move. But before Colt could leave his hiding place, he saw something that made his blood freeze. A woman emerged from the millinery shop across the street, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. She wore a simple grey dress and a bonnet that partially concealed her face, but Colt would have recognized her anywhere. Sarah. She was alive. She was here. She had not left Redemption Falls at all. Colt's mind reeled as he watched her walk down the street, moving with the careful steps of someone who carried a heavy burden. She looked thinner than he remembered. Her shoulders hunched slightly, as if against more than just the rain. There was something defeated in her posture, something broken that had not been there 3 years ago. He wanted to call out to her, to run after her, to tell her everything, but something held him back. Why had the woman at the general store lied about Sarah leaving town? Why had everyone, he asked, told him she was gone? Colt watched as Sarah turned down a side street, heading toward the poorer section of town, where small cottages huddled together behind picket fences. He waited until she was out of sight, then climbed down from the loft and followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. Sarah stopped at a small house at the end of the street, one that badly needed paint and had a sagging porch. She climbed the steps carefully and disappeared inside. Colt positioned himself behind a neighbor's shed where he could observe without being seen. For the next hour, nothing happened. Then a woman emerged from the house next door and called over the fence. "Mrs. Grimsby, are you home? I've got those eggs you wanted." Colt felt the world tilt beneath him. Mrs. Grimsby. The neighbor woman called again, and Sarah appeared on the porch. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That's very kind." Her voice was soft, subdued. Nothing like the vibrant woman Colt remembered. "How are you feeling today, dear? Any better?" "About the same, thank you." Sarah accepted a basket of eggs and retreated back inside. Colt stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Sarah was married to Fletcher Grimsby, the man who had stolen their letters, who had kept them apart, who had built his fortune on lies and deception. That man had somehow married Sarah. It made no sense. Sarah would never have married Grimsby willingly. She loved Colt. She had written to him, waited for him, unless Grimsby had told her something, a lie so convincing that it had broken her hope and driven her into a desperate choice. Colt needed answers. He needed to understand how this had happened, and he needed to get Sarah away from Grimsby before the postmaster realized that everything was about to come crashing down around him. He made his way back toward the center of town, his mind racing. He found Marshal Brennan outside the local marshal's office, speaking with the town's lawman, a young man named Deputy Simmons, who looked nervous and out of his depth. "Marshal Brennan," Colt said quietly, approaching from the side. "I'm Colt Reeves. We need to talk." Brennan turned, his sharp eyes taking in Colt's appearance in an instant. "Mr. Reeves, I got your evidence from Blackwood. Compelling material. We need to discuss how to proceed." "There's been a development," Colt said. "Can we speak privately?" They adjourned to a small office inside the marshal's station. Colt explained what he had just discovered, that Sarah was alive, still in Redemption Falls, and somehow married to Fletcher Grimsby. Brennan listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "This adds a complication," Brennan said when Colt finished. "If Mrs. Grimsby is involved in her husband's crimes—" "She's not involved," Colt said firmly. "I know this woman. She's honest, decent. If she married Grimsby, it's because she was deceived somehow." "We'll need to question her," Brennan said, "but carefully. If Grimsby suspects we're moving against him, he might flee or destroy evidence. Or worse, he might harm his wife to keep her from testifying." Colt's jaw tightened. "Then we move quickly. Today." "Agreed. But first, I need to see all the evidence you've collected, letters, ledger pages, everything." They returned to the abandoned stable where Colt had hidden the canvas sack. As Brennan examined the letters, his expression grew increasingly grim. He pulled out several that appeared to be legal documents, deeds, contracts, bank transfers. "This is extensive," Brennan said. "Years of systematic fraud. And if this ledger page is accurate, Grimsby and his partner Everett have stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in property and cash." "What's our next move?" Colt asked. "I'll get arrest warrants from the territorial judge. That'll take a few hours. Meanwhile, I want you to—" A gunshot cracked through the afternoon air, followed by screams. Both men rushed outside to see people running down the main street, panicking. A man stumbled past, clutching his arm where blood seeped through his fingers. "What happened?" Brennan demanded. "Grimsby's men," the wounded man gasped. "Pike and Dalton. They burst into the law office and grabbed Raymond Everett, said something about loose ends and witnesses. They shot anyone who tried to stop them." Colt and Brennan exchanged a look. "Grimsby knows," Colt said. "Somehow he found out we're closing in." "Then we move now," Brennan said. "No time for warrants. Mr. Reeves, you're deputized as of this moment. We're going to arrest Fletcher Grimsby before he can flee or destroy evidence." They ran toward the post office, weapons drawn. But as they approached, they saw smoke beginning to billow from the building's windows. Someone had set a fire, likely to destroy the records kept inside. Deputy Simmons and two townsmen were already battling the flames with buckets of water. Brennan joined them while Colt circled to the back of the building. Through a window, he could see Grimsby's office. The door was open, the room empty, papers scattered across the floor. Grimsby had fled. taking what he could carry. Colt's thoughts immediately went to Sarah. If Grimsby was running, would he take her with him, use her as a hostage? He sprinted toward the small house at the end of the side street, his heart pounding. The front door stood open, banging in the wind. Colt drew his revolver and entered cautiously. The house was in disarray. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, their contents scattered. In the bedroom, Colt found a small writing desk that had been ransacked. Papers were strewn across the floor, but one document caught his eye. A marriage certificate, dated 2 years ago. It certified that Sarah Elizabeth Monroe had married Fletcher William Grimsby in a ceremony witnessed by Raymond Everett and a woman named Clara Sims. Colt stared at the document, noting the date. Just 6 months after Sarah's last letter to him, the one that had never been delivered. But as he examined the certificate more closely, something seemed wrong. The signatures looked odd. The paper was too new for a 2-year-old document. Colt held it up to the light and saw watermarks that indicated recent production. This certificate was a forgery. Or at least, it had been created recently to replace an original. He searched through the scattered papers and found what he was looking for, a letter from a Kansas City attorney addressed to Sarah. "Mrs. Monroe," it began. "I regret to inform you that Mr. Colt Reeves died in a steamboat accident on the Mississippi River in October of last year. As his fiancée, you may have legal claim to certain effects he left behind. Please contact this office at your earliest convenience." The letter was dated December of 1880, 8 months after Colt had left Redemption Falls. It was also a complete fabrication. Colt had never been on a steamboat, had never been anywhere near the Mississippi River during that period. But Sarah would not have known that. She would have received this letter delivered personally by Grimsby, no doubt, and believed that Colt was dead. Her last hope would have died with that news. And then Grimsby, presenting himself as a shoulder to cry on, a respected member of the community offering comfort and stability, would have courted her in her grief. He would have been patient, understanding, slowly convincing her that life could go on, that she deserved companionship and security. The marriage would have been a business transaction for Grimsby. Sarah's store, her property, her modest savings, all would have become his upon marriage. And Sarah, heartbroken and alone, would have accepted his proposal because she saw no other path forward. Colt's hands shook as he held the forged letter. Grimsby had not just stolen their correspondence. He had fabricated evidence of Colt's death, had used that lie to manipulate Sarah into marriage, and had taken everything she owned. It was a level of cruelty that Colt had not imagined possible. A sound from the kitchen made him turn. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She was staring at Colt as if seeing a ghost. "You're dead," she whispered. "The letter said you were dead. The attorney confirmed it. How can you be standing here?" Colt holstered his revolver and took a step toward her. "Sarah, I never died. That letter was a lie. All of it was lies. Grimsby made it up to trick you into marrying him." Sarah shook her head, backing away. No, that can't be true. Fletcher wouldn't. He said he loved me. He said he wanted to take care of me after I lost you. He stole our letters, Sarah." Colt pulled out the canvas sack, still slung over his shoulder, and showed her the contents. "Hundreds of letters, including the ones I sent to you from Street, Louis. Including the ones you sent to me. Grimsby intercepted all of them. He kept us apart deliberately." Sarah stared at the letters, her expression crumbling. "My letters to you. I never understood why you didn't respond. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought you had changed your mind about us. That your mother's death had made you realize you wanted a different life." "Never," Colt said fiercely. "I loved you. I love you still. Everything that happened, every day we've been apart, it was all because of Grimsby's lies." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "He used my grief. He used my loneliness. He took advantage of my broken heart and turned it into a weapon against me." Before Colt could respond, the front door crashed open. Fletcher Grimsby stood there, a revolver in his hand, his face twisted with rage. "How touching," he snarled. The dead fiancé returns. Well, Mr. Reeves, you should have stayed dead. Colt's hand moved toward his holstered revolver, but Grimsby was faster. Don't, the postmaster snapped. I'll shoot her before you clear leather. Is that what you want? To have her die because of your heroics? Colt froze, his eyes locked on Grimsby's weapon. The man was perhaps 40 years old, thin and well-dressed despite the chaos, with sharp features and cold eyes that betrayed no mercy. This was not the scared criminal fleeing justice. This was a cornered predator, dangerous and desperate. "Sarah, come here," Grimsby commanded. "Stand next to me." Sarah did not move. She stood between the two men, her body rigid, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You told me he was dead." "I gave you a life," Grimsby said coldly. "I took you out of your grief and gave you security, a home, status in this community. Without me, you would have lost everything. Without you, I would have had the man I loved," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. "Without you, I would have had the truth." Grimsby's expression darkened. "The truth is that Reeves abandoned you. He went to Street Louis and stayed there for months while you waited. I simply helped you accept reality and move on." "By lying," Colt said, his voice hard. "By forging letters, by stealing our correspondence so we couldn't find each other. That's not helping, Grimsby. That's manipulation. That's evil. Call it what you want," Grimsby said. "I saw an opportunity and I took it. That's business. That's survival on the frontier. The weak lose everything while the strong prosper. I chose to be strong." "You chose to be a thief and a fraud," Colt said. "And now you're going to answer for it. Marshal Brennan is in town. He's got the evidence. It's over, Grimsby." For the first time, something like fear flickered across Grimsby's face. "Brennan, damn that meddling fool. I should have paid him off years ago when I had the chance." "So you knew he was honest," Colt said. "That's why you avoided doing business in his territory. But you couldn't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," Grimsby said. "I'm leaving, and Sarah is coming with me. We're going west, to California, where we'll start fresh with new names and new lives." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are," Grimsby said flatly. "Because if you don't, I'll tell everyone in this town that you knew about my business all along, that you helped me steal mail, that you were part of the conspiracy. Your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison." "That's a lie," Sarah said. "I knew nothing about what you did." "Can you prove it?" Grimsby smiled coldly. "I have documents that suggest otherwise. Letters with your signature, ledgers showing payments to you, all carefully created over the past 2 years, just in case I ever needed insurance. If I go down, Sarah, you go down with me." Colt felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Grimsby was bluffing, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. The man was not stupid. He knew that shooting either Colt or Sarah would only make things worse. He was stalling, trying to figure out an escape route. "You're not leaving," Colt said, "and you're not taking Sarah. Put down the gun, Grimsby. It's over." "It's not over until I say it's over," Grimsby snarled. "I've spent 6 years building an empire in this territory. I'm not going to let some cavalry scout with delusions of justice tear it all down." Outside, Colt could hear voices shouting, people running. The fire at the post office was spreading, and the townspeople were rallying to fight it. Soon, someone would come looking for Grimsby. Soon, Marshal Brennan would realize where Colt had gone and come to help. All Colt had to do was keep Grimsby talking, keep him from doing something desperate. "How did you know I was in town?" Colt asked. "Who told you?" Grimsby laughed bitterly. "You think I don't have eyes everywhere? Blackwood sent word from Grey Rock that you were asking questions. I had my men watching for you. When you showed up in Redemption Falls, I knew you'd bring trouble. I just didn't act quickly enough." "Where are Pike and Dalton now?" Colt asked. "Still burning evidence?" "They're securing our escape route," Grimsby said. "And if you're smart, you'll let us leave. Take Sarah, rebuild your life together, and forget this ever happened. Nobody has to get hurt." "Except for all the people you've already hurt," Colt said. "The families you've torn apart, the businesses you've destroyed, the lives you've ruined. They all matter, Grimsby, every single one of them." "They were weak," Grimsby spat. "They didn't deserve what they had. I took from those who couldn't protect themselves. That's the law of the frontier." "That's not law," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. "That's cruelty. That's greed. You're not a businessman, Fletcher. You're a predator who feeds on people's misery." Grimsby's face flushed with rage. "You ungrateful after everything I've done for you." "You've done nothing but use me," Sarah interrupted. "You married me for my property, my store, my savings. You never loved me. You never even respected me." "Love," Grimsby sneered. "What good is love? Can it buy property? Can it build wealth? Love is a fantasy that weak people cling to while the world passes them by." As Grimsby spoke, Colt noticed something tucked under the postmaster's arm, a leather-bound ledger book, thick and well-worn. That had to be Grimsby's personal records, the master accounting of all his crimes. If Colt could get that book, combined with the canvas sack of letters, they would have irrefutable evidence of the full scope of the conspiracy. "That ledger under your arm," Colt said. "That's what you were trying to save from the fire, isn't it? Your insurance policy, proof of every crime, every transaction, every property you stole." Grimsby's grip on the book tightened. "This is my life's work. A perfect record of how to succeed in a world that doesn't care about sentiment or fairness." "It's a confession," Colt said, "and it's going to put you in prison for the rest of your life." "Only if it falls into the wrong hands," Grimsby said. He shifted his stance, preparing to move. "Sarah, last chance. Come with me or face the consequences." Sarah stepped backward, moving closer to Colt. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Fletcher. I'd rather face prison than spend another day living your lies." Grimsby's expression turned murderous. "So be it. If I can't have you, neither can he." He raised his revolver, aiming at Sarah. Colt moved without thinking, throwing himself in front of her. The gunshot was deafening in the small room, and Colt felt a burning pain across his left shoulder as the bullet grazed him. But Colt was already moving, his own revolver clearing leather in a smooth motion born of years of practice. He fired once, deliberately aiming low. The bullet hit Grimsby in the thigh, dropping him to the floor with a scream of pain. The ledger flew from Grimsby's grip, sliding across the floor. Sarah scooped it up, clutching it to her chest. Colt kicked Grimsby's revolver away and stood over him, his own weapon trained on the writhing postmaster. "It's over," Colt said quietly. "No more running, no more lies." The front door burst open, and Marshal Brennan rushed in, his own weapon drawn. He took in the scene in an instant, Colt bleeding from a shoulder wound, Sarah holding the ledger, Grimsby wounded on the floor. "I heard the shots," Brennan said. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Colt said, though his shoulder was beginning to throb. Grimsby tried to flee. "He's wounded but alive." Brennan holstered his weapon and pulled out a pair of iron shackles. He secured Grimsby's wrists, then called for Deputy Simmons to help transport the prisoner to the jail. As they hauled Grimsby to his feet, the postmaster looked at Sarah with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I'll make sure of it. Even from prison, I have friends. They'll come for you. They'll make you pay." "Your friends are going to prison too," Brennan said calmly. "Raymond Everett was arrested trying to leave town. Pike and Dalton are in custody. Your entire operation is being rolled up as we speak. You have no friends left, Grimsby. Only justice waiting for you." As they dragged Grimsby away, Sarah turned to Colt, her eyes filled with tears. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," Colt said, though blood was soaking through his shirt. "I've had worse." Sarah carefully set down the ledger and helped Colt into a chair. She fetched clean cloth from the kitchen and began tending to his wound, her hands gentle but efficient. As she worked, tears ran down her face, but she did not sob or wail. She simply let the tears fall, silent testimony to 3 years of grief and betrayal. "I'm sorry," Colt said softly. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry you went through all of this alone." "You came back," Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. "That's what matters. You found the truth, and you came back." "I never stopped looking for you," Colt said. "Even when I thought you had left, even when I didn't know where to search, I never stopped thinking about you." Sarah finished binding his wound and finally met his eyes. "The woman at the general store told you I had left town, didn't she? That was Fletcher's doing. He spread rumors that I had moved away, that I wanted to forget my past. He isolated me from everyone who had known us together, made sure no one would tell me if someone came asking about me. He was thorough," Colt admitted. "I'll give him that. But he made one mistake." "What was that?" "He underestimated how far I would go to find you, how many trails I would follow, how much I would sacrifice to uncover the truth." Colt reached out and took her hand. "And he underestimated you, your strength, your resilience, your ability to recognize the truth when you finally heard it." Sarah squeezed his hand, and for the first time in 3 years, Colt felt a measure of peace. They were not whole yet. There was still healing to be done, trust to be rebuilt, a future to be carefully constructed from the ruins of the past. But they were together, they had the truth, and they had each other. Marshal Brennan returned an hour later, bringing a doctor to properly dress Colt's wound. As the doctor worked, Brennan examined the ledger Sarah had saved, his expression growing more amazed with each page he turned. "This is incredible," he said. "Grimsby documented everything, every stolen letter, every fraudulent transaction, every property he acquired through deception. He even listed his co-conspirators and how much they were paid. This is going to take down a dozen corrupt officials across the territory." "Good," Colt said. "They all deserve to answer for what they've done." Brennan looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Grimsby, or should I say Miss Monroe, I'm going to need you to provide a statement. Everything you know about your husband's activities, everything you witnessed or overheard." "I'll tell you everything," Sarah said. "Though I'm afraid I didn't know much. Fletcher was very careful to keep me ignorant of his business dealings." "That may actually work in your favor," Brennan said. "The territorial judge will want to determine if you were complicit or simply another victim. Based on what I've seen so far, I believe you were a victim, but we'll need to establish that officially." After the doctor and the marshal left, Colt and Sarah sat together in the small house, not speaking, just being present with each other. Outside, the sounds of the town gradually returned to normal. The fire at the post office had been contained. People were beginning to emerge from their homes, talking in hushed voices about what had happened. Sarah leaned her head against Colt's good shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Colt said, "we start over. We reclaim the life that was stolen from us, and we make sure nobody else ever has to suffer the way we did." Sarah nodded, and they sat together as the afternoon light faded into evening. Two people who had been torn apart by lies and brought back together by truth, ready to face whatever came next, as long as they could face it together. The next morning, Marshal Brennan posted notices throughout Redemption Falls and the surrounding territory. The notices, printed on official government paper with the federal marshal's seal, were direct and clear. Notice to all residents. Be it known that Fletcher William Grimsby, former postmaster of Redemption Falls, along with Raymond Everett, attorney at law, and their associates, have been arrested on charges of mail fraud, theft, conspiracy, and extortion. Any person who believes they may have been affected by the interception or theft of mail correspondence between the years 1877 and 1883 is hereby requested to present themselves at the Redemption Falls Marshal's office to provide testimony. All testimony will be recorded and used in the prosecution of the accused. Protection will be provided to any witness who fears retaliation by order of U.S. Federal District Court, Fort Smith. The notices caused an immediate stir. People gathered in clusters on street corners, talking in animated voices. Some were shocked, unable to believe that their respected postmaster had been a criminal. Others nodded grimly, having long suspected that something was wrong, but lacking the courage or evidence to speak up. By mid-morning, a line had formed outside the marshal's office. People clutched old letters, yellowed documents, bank statements showing suspicious transactions. An elderly woman brought a stack of letters from her son in California, letters she had never received, which had been discovered in the canvas sack. A young farmer carried the deed to property he had lost to foreclosure, property that had been purchased by Grimsby at auction for a fraction of its value. One by one, they told their stories. A merchant who had never received payment from a customer, payment that had been sent but never arrived. A widow who had lost her husband's pension because the bank's notification letters had been intercepted. A young couple whose wedding had been delayed for years because the bride's inheritance documentation had vanished into Grimsby's hoard. Each story added another layer to the massive conspiracy. Each testimony revealed another life, damaged or destroyed by one man's greed. Colt spent the morning at the marshal's office, his shoulder bandaged and aching, but his spirit lifted by what he was witnessing. These people had lived in confusion and pain for years, blaming themselves or each other for problems that had been deliberately manufactured. Now they were learning the truth, and with that truth came a measure of healing. Sarah sat beside him, still wearing her plain grey dress, her hands folded in her lap. She had given her own testimony earlier, describing how Grimsby had courted her after presenting the forged letter about Colt's death. Her voice had been steady as she recounted the manipulation, the isolation, the way Grimsby had slowly taken control of her life and property. Marshal Brennan had been gentle with her. Recognizing that she was as much a victim as anyone else who had come forward, he assured her that no charges would be filed against her, that her marriage to Grimsby would be annulled based on the fraud it was built upon. Around noon, Jacob Winters arrived, the farmer whose inheritance letter Colt had found in the sack. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with calloused hands and tired eyes. When Brennan showed him the letters from the Kansas City attorney, along with the brass key that had been enclosed, Winters simply stood there, silent tears running down his weathered face. "My uncle died 3 years ago," Winters said finally. "I never knew. I thought he had forgotten about me, that I didn't matter enough for him to reach out. I blamed myself for not visiting him before he passed." He looked at the key in his hand. "And all this time, there was an inheritance waiting for me, property in Colorado, enough to save my farm, to give my children a better life." "You can still claim it," Brennan said. "The estate may have gone through probate, but with this evidence, we can petition the courts to reopen the case. It won't be quick, but you'll get what's rightfully yours." Winters shook his head in wonder. "I almost lost my farm last year, had to sell off half my land just to pay the taxes. And Grimsby was there at the auction, buying it up cheap, acting like he was doing me a favor." He looked up at Colt. "You found these letters?" "A frightened donkey found them," Colt said. "I just made sure they got to the right people." Winters extended his hand, and Colt shook it. "Thank you. Thank you for caring enough to dig into this. Most men would have just moved on." "I had personal reasons," Colt admitted, glancing at Sarah. "But I'm glad it's helped others too." As the day wore on, more people continued to arrive with their stories. The scale of Grimsby's operation became clearer with each testimony. He had not just stolen mail, he had systematically targeted people he knew were vulnerable, people who were waiting for important correspondence about inheritances, business deals, legal matters, or personal relationships. He had read their mail, identified opportunities, and then either intercepted the correspondence entirely or delayed it until it was too late to matter. The profits had been substantial. According to the ledger, Grimsby and his partner Everett had accumulated more than $500,000 in cash and property over 6 years, a fortune by frontier standards. By evening, Marshal Brennan had compiled more than 50 sworn statements from victims. Each statement corroborated the evidence from the canvas sack and the ledger. The case against Grimsby was ironclad. As the marshal's office finally closed for the day, Brennan approached Colt and Sarah. The territorial judge will be here next week to conduct preliminary hearings. I'll need both of you to testify. After that, Grimsby and his associates will be transported to Fort Smith for trial. We'll be here, Colt said. Brennan nodded. Good. And Mr. Reeves, I want to thank you. Without your persistence, none of this would have come to light. You've done a service not just to yourself and Miss Monroe, but to this entire territory. I just wanted the truth, Colt said simply. Well, you got it, and justice along with it. As they left the marshal's office, Colt and Sarah walked through the quiet streets of Redemption Falls. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. People they passed offered small nods of respect or words of thanks. The town was beginning to understand what had been done to them, and they were beginning to heal. Sarah stopped in front of the old general store, the one she had once owned, the one Grimsby had taken from her through his fraudulent marriage. I used to stand here every evening, she said softly, watching the street, hoping to see you riding back into town. Day after day, week after week, I waited, and when the letter came saying you were dead, something inside me died too. Colt took her hand. Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the sunset. Promise me something. Promise me that we'll never let anyone come between us again. That we'll always tell each other the truth, no matter how difficult it is. I promise, Colt said. No more secrets, no more lost letters. Just us, facing the future together. Sarah leaned against him, and they stood there in the fading light, two people who had survived betrayal and separation, ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from them. The preliminary hearing took place 1 week later in the Redemption Falls courthouse, a modest building that had never seen a case of this magnitude. Territorial Judge Nathaniel Hawthorne presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for corruption. The courtroom was packed, every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls and in the doorway, straining to hear. The citizens of Redemption Falls and the surrounding territory had come to see justice served, to witness the moment when Fletcher Grimsby would answer for his crimes. Grimsby sat at the defense table, his legs still bandaged from the gunshot wound, his hands shackled. His attorney, brought in from Kansas City, looked uncomfortable with the evidence stacked against his client. Raymond Everett sat beside Grimsby, equally shackled, his face pale and drawn. Marshal Brennan presented the evidence methodically. He displayed the canvas sack filled with stolen letters. He read from the ledger, detailing specific transactions and fraudulent acquisitions. He called witness after witness, each one describing how Grimsby's theft of their mail had damaged their lives. Jacob Winters testified about his lost inheritance. The elderly woman spoke about the letters from her son that had never arrived, causing her years of unnecessary worry. The young couple described their delayed wedding and the financial hardship they had endured. Through it all, Grimsby sat stone-faced, showing no emotion, no remorse. Only when Sarah took the stand did his composure crack. Sarah described their courtship, the forged letter announcing Colt's death, the pressure Grimsby had applied to convince her to marry him. She spoke about the isolation, the control, the way Grimsby had systematically taken over her business and her life. Her voice remained steady, but tears ran down her face as she recounted the betrayal. Grimsby leaned toward his attorney and whispered urgently. The attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." Judge Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Grimsby, you have the right to remain silent. I would advise you to consult with your counsel before speaking." "I don't need counsel," Grimsby said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I need to speak the truth. These people," he gestured at the packed courtroom, "they're making me out to be some kind of monster. But all I did was take advantage of opportunities that presented themselves. That's not a crime. That's business." "Mail theft is a federal crime," Judge Hawthorne said coldly. "Fraud is a crime. Extortion is a crime. Continue, Mr. Grimsby, but be aware that everything you say can and will be used against you. I built something, Grimsby continued, standing despite his injury. I came to this backwater territory with nothing but my skills and my ambition. I saw a broken system, inefficient and corrupt, and I made it work for me. These people, he pointed at the witnesses, they were weak. They couldn't protect what was theirs. They didn't deserve to keep it. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel sharply. Order! Mr. Grimsby, you are not helping your case. I don't care about my case, Grimsby said, his voice rising. I care about the truth. The truth is that I'm smarter than these people. I saw what they couldn't see. I took what they couldn't protect. That's not evil, that's survival. That's success. He turned to face Sarah. And you think you're a victim? You had nothing before I married you. A failing store, mounting debts, no prospects. I gave you security, stability, a place in society, and this is how you repay me? By testifying against me? Colt started to rise from his seat, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. She stood, facing Grimsby across the courtroom. You gave me nothing but lies, she said quietly. Security built on deception is not security at all. It's a prison. You didn't save me, Fletcher. You trapped me. And the only reason I couldn't see it was because you had stolen my hope, my future, my ability to choose for myself. Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel again. That's enough. Mr. Grimsby, sit down. I've heard more than enough to make my determination. The judge opened a leather folder and referred to his notes. When he looked up, his expression was granite. Fletcher, William Grimsby, and Raymond Everett, I am ordering you bound over for trial in federal court on charges of mail fraud, theft of government property, conspiracy to commit fraud, and extortion. Bail is denied. You will be transported to Fort Smith to await trial. He paused, then added, In my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case of such systematic and deliberate cruelty. You did not just steal mail, Mr. Grimsby. You stole lives. You destroyed families. You built your fortune on the suffering of others. If I had the authority to sentence you here and now, I would give you the maximum penalty allowed by law. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. That sound, wood striking wood, represented the moment when Fletcher Grimsby's empire of lies officially ended. Court is adjourned. As the marshal's deputies led Grimsby and Everett away in chains, the courtroom erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, finally able to express their relief and satisfaction. Justice had been served, or at least begun to be served. The full trial would come later, but everyone in that room knew the outcome was certain. Colt embraced Sarah as the crowd surged around them, people reaching out to shake their hands, to offer thanks, to share their own relief that the truth had finally been exposed. Marshal Brennan approached, his weathered face showing something like satisfaction. The trial in Fort Smith will take a few months to organize, but with this evidence, conviction is assured. Grimsby is looking at 20 years minimum in federal prison. Everett will probably get 15. And Pike and Dalton? Colt asked. They're cooperating, providing information about other corrupt officials who were part of the network. They'll get reduced sentences in exchange for their testimony, but they'll still serve time. Sarah looked up at Colt. Is it really over? The legal part will take time, Colt said, but the important part, the part where we get our truth back, that's done. Grimsby can't hurt anyone anymore. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun shone bright and clear. People gathered in small groups, sharing stories, offering support to one another. The community that had been fractured by Grimsby's manipulation was beginning to knit itself back together, bound by shared experience and the relief of finally understanding what had happened to them. Colt and Sarah walked through the crowd, acknowledging greetings, accepting thanks. They made their way to the edge of town, to a small hill overlooking the Arkansas River Valley. From there, they could see Redemption Falls spread out below them, a town that had been corrupted but not destroyed, damaged but not defeated. "I need to ask you something," Colt said, taking Sarah's hand. "And I need you to be honest with me, no matter what the answer is." Sarah looked at him, her green eyes clear and direct. "Ask. After everything you've been through, after all the betrayal and pain, do you think you could ever trust me again? Could you still want a life with me, or is too much time and hurt between us?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the valley. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful but certain. "3 years ago, I loved you with the innocent trust of someone who had never been betrayed. That love was real, but it was also fragile. It shattered the moment I believed you were dead." She turned to face him. "Now I'm older. I've been tested and hurt and forced to survive things I never imagined. And I find that I love you still, but it's a different kind of love. Stronger, deeper, built on truth rather than hope." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, Colt, I could trust you again. I do trust you. And yes, I want that life we planned. Not the innocent dream we had before, but something better, something real." Colt pulled her close, holding her as if she might disappear if he let go. "Then let's build it. Let's make that life real." Below them, Redemption Falls continued its daily rhythm, a town healing from wounds it had not known it carried, moving forward into an honest future. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Colt and Sarah stood in the Redemption Falls church where they had originally planned to marry. The same church, the same vows, but everything else had changed. The pews were filled with townspeople who had come not just to witness a wedding, but to celebrate the triumph of truth over deception, of love over betrayal. Jacob Winters sat in the front row, his farm saved by the inheritance he had finally claimed. The elderly woman whose son's letters had been stolen sat beside him, holding a recent letter from that son, the first communication they had shared in 5 years. The young couple, who had delayed their own wedding, sat holding hands, their own ceremony now scheduled for the spring. Virgil Blackwood had travelled from Grey Rock to attend, bringing with him the donkey that had started everything. The animal, now well fed and properly cared for, stood patiently outside the church, adorned with ribbons. The townspeople had taken to calling it Justice, a name that seemed fitting for the creature that had carried the evidence of so many crimes. Sarah wore a simple white dress, her auburn hair adorned with autumn wildflowers. She looked older than she had 3 years ago, lines of experience marking her face, but there was a peace in her expression that had been absent before. This was a woman who had been tested and had emerged stronger. Colt wore his best suit, his cavalry badge pinned to his vest where it belonged. His shoulder had healed well, leaving only a scar to remind him of the confrontation with Grimsby. He carried himself with quiet confidence, a man who had fulfilled his duty and could now rest. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. The minister spoke about trials and redemption, about truth and forgiveness, about the strength required to fight for what was right. When it came time for vows, Sarah spoke first. "I promise to trust you with the truth, even when it's difficult. I promise to build a future with you based on honesty and respect. I promise to remember that love is not just a feeling, but a choice we make every day, even when that choice is hard." Colt replied, "I promise to protect you, not by hiding you from the world, but by standing beside you as we face it together. I promise to be patient as we rebuild what was broken. I promise to honor the strength you've shown and the courage it took to survive these past years." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, celebrating not just a wedding, but the restoration of something that had been stolen. At the reception that followed, held in the town square under a bright autumn sky, Marshal Brennan approached the newlyweds. He carried a letter, its envelope bearing the seal of the federal court. "News from Fort Smith," he said. "Grimsby was sentenced yesterday. 25 years in federal prison. Everett got 20. Pike and Dalton received 10 years each in exchange for their testimony. It's finally over." Colt nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Marshal, for everything you did. "I was just doing my job," Brennan said. "You're the one who wouldn't let it go, who kept pushing for answers. This victory belongs to you and all the people Grimsby hurt." After Brennan departed, Colt and Sarah spent the afternoon accepting congratulations, sharing their joy with the community that had supported them. As evening approached, they slipped away from the celebration and walked to the small house they had purchased together. Not the house where Sarah had lived with Grimsby, but a new place, a fresh start. Inside, sitting on the kitchen table, was a sheet of clean paper, an inkwell, and a pen. Sarah had placed them there that morning, a symbolic gesture they had discussed. "Should we write it now?" Sarah asked. Colt nodded. Together. They sat side by side, and Sarah dipped the pen in ink. Together, they composed a letter to the editor of the territorial newspaper, a letter that would be reprinted in papers throughout the West. "To the citizens of Oklahoma Territory, we write to you as two people who were separated by lies and reunited by truth. Our story has been told in these pages before, but we wish to add our own words to the record. 3 years ago, a corrupt postmaster stole our letters and used our separation to his advantage. He manipulated, deceived, and profited from the pain of many families across this territory. But his crimes were exposed, and justice was served. We do not write to dwell on the past, but to speak of the future. We have learned that communication is sacred, that the simple act of sending and receiving letters carries with it trust and hope. When that trust is betrayed, entire lives can be destroyed. We urge all citizens to remain vigilant, to demand honesty from those who serve in positions of public trust, and to never assume that silence means consent or abandonment. Ask questions. Demand answers. Hold your officials accountable. To those who suffered as we did, we offer our solidarity and our hope that you have found or will find your own paths to healing and justice. And to those who helped us, Marshal Brennan, Virgil Blackwood, and the many citizens who came forward with testimony, we offer our deepest gratitude. The mail system has been reformed in Redemption Falls. A new postmaster has been appointed, one with impeccable credentials and a commitment to transparency. Letters are now logged and tracked carefully. The days of stolen correspondence are over. We begin our marriage not with the innocent dreams we once had, but with something better, the hard-won knowledge that truth matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that love can survive even the deepest betrayals if it is built on honesty and mutual respect. With hope for the future, Colt and Sarah Reeves. They signed the letter together, their signatures intertwined at the bottom of the page. Tomorrow they would mail it, trusting that it would reach its destination, trusting in the reformed system that they had helped to create. But tonight, they simply sat together in their new home, hands clasped, watching the sun set through the window. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched before them, full of possibility. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the celebration continuing in the town square: music, laughter, the voices of a community healing. Somewhere in that crowd, Justice the donkey was probably being fed treats by children who saw the animal as a hero. It was a good ending to a story that had begun with fear and betrayal. But more than that, it was a good beginning to a story that was just starting, a story of two people who had survived the worst and chosen to build something better from the ruins. Colt reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the silver locket Sarah had given him years ago, the one containing her photograph. He opened it, looking at the image that had sustained him through years of searching. "You don't need that anymore," Sarah said softly. "I'm right here." Colt smiled and closed the locket, but he did not put it away. "I know, but I think I'll keep it anyway. A reminder of how far we've traveled and how lucky we are to have found our way back to each other." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over Redemption Falls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chapters in their story. But tonight they had everything they needed: truth, justice, and each other. The stolen letters had been returned. The lies had been exposed. The guilty had been punished. And in a small house at the edge of a frontier town, two people who had been torn apart by deception were finally, truly, home. The frightened donkey, who had held onto that canvas sack with such determination, had carried more than just evidence of crimes. It had carried hope, hope that truth would prevail, that justice would be served, that love could survive even the cruelest betrayals. And in the end, that hope had been justified. The letters had reached their destinations after all, just years later than intended. But their message remained the same. Love endures, truth matters, and sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything. As Colt and Sarah Reeves began their life together, they carried with them the lessons of their ordeal. They knew now that communication was precious, that trust must be earned and maintained, that vigilance was the price of freedom. But most of all, they knew that some things are worth fighting for, worth suffering for, worth never giving up on. And that knowledge, hard-won and tested, would sustain them through whatever challenges the future might bring. Outside their window, the stars emerged one by one, ancient and unchanging, witnessing another chapter in the eternal human story